Hi, I'm John Nixon from Eagle Lake Woodworking, and today I'm going to show you how to make a tool stand using loose tenon joinery on the router table. What I have is a benchtop sander that I wanted to mobilize. Like many small shops, I need to put things on wheels and push them against the wall when they're not in use. Beyond wheels, I can get at all sides of this sander easily, depending on what operation I'm doing on the sander. And then when the sander's not in use, it easily rolls into the corner for storage, out of the way. The construction of the tool stand is simple. We're going to use loose tenon joinery and make a mortise in the end of each cross member as well as in the leg, and then we'll use a loose tenon or a floating tenon to join that. So we'll have a mortise pair in each of these locations, and we'll glue in a loose tenon to make a really strong joint. And we'll keep the size of the mortise the same across all 16 mortises, and that'll simplify assembly and construction. To make the legs, we're going to glue up two 2x8s after we plane them flat, and then rip them in half to make two legs out of each glue up. So first thing, trip to the planer and flatten up both sides. I'm going to alternate sides with each pass to try to work any cup out of the board. I've selected boards that aren't twisted in any way or bowed, but they might be slightly cupped, so all we're going to do is flatten each face. Now that one side's flattened, we can change the depth, flatten out the other side. It may take a couple of passes, alternating in this manner to get the board completely flat. Now that we've got the faces of the pieces planed flat, it's time to glue them up. An even coat of glue on both sides. The end result is going to be as close to a 3-inch leg as we can get. So, since we started with a 2x8 that's roughly 7 1/4, we should have enough room in the width of this board to cut it into two 3-inch rips, and then plane and joint those legs square after we cut it into two legs. Looks good. Let's clamp it up. Put this whole assembly to dry and do the other one. The finished assemblies are set aside to dry. Meanwhile, I'm going to mill the rest of the lumber for the stand. We should be able to get all the apron pieces out of this one board, which is nice. It's a nice dense piece of pine. We're going to do the same procedure as before, which is to flatten both faces, make a uniform thickness of the board, approximately 1 1/4 inches. Now I'm over at the joiner where I'm going to put one flat edge to rip this board in two and eliminate the bevel that comes on construction grade lumber. Okay, I've moved over to the table saw where I'm going to rip this board in half to maximize the width I can get for two cross members. Okay, back at the joiner, we're going to clean up both edges until they're the exact same width. Now that we have our cross member stock dimensioned and flattened, we're going to cut the pieces to length. And the good thing about loose tenon joinery is there's no accounting for extra stock for a tenon. You're going to make this piece the exact length that it's going to be because you're going to cut a mortise in the end. First thing I always do is make a square cut on the end of each board, just so I know that I'm starting with a square end. Okay, I've moved over to the router table to make the mortises. And what I have here is a tenon jig that slides back and forth and I bring the router bit up into the work through an electronic motorized router lift. So the first thing I had to do was set the depth that I wanted the mortise to be. And so from underneath, I've raised the router to the maximum depth that I like this mortise to cut. And as I'm cutting, eventually it'll hit the depth stop, and that'll be the point at which the motorized router lift will stop. So I'm going to bring it back down to 0. Put on the tenon jig. Now I've adjusted the tenon jig to the proper distance to center the mortise. The mortise width is determined by the width of the bit. In this case I'm using a 1/2 inch spiral upcut bit. We're going to be making a mortise that's 2 inches wide by the 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches deep. So I want to find the center of this board and make a mark. And I only have to do this for the first one because I've added these stops on the face of the tenon jig for repeatable cuts. So I've got that all set up to go. I'm going to clamp the workpiece in there and I'm ready to mortise. And all of these pieces, all the shorts and all the longs, will all get the same mortise in the end of the piece. And having these stop blocks there not only help hold the workpiece in place, but it sets up nicely for repeatable cuts. That's the first mortise. I'm going to go on and do the other 7 in the same way. But the next ones just fit right down in the setup blocks nicely, and I don't have to do anything besides reset the router lift, the bit, back down to 0. And clamp the piece back in, and I'm ready to make the next one. Exact same width mortise, depth, size. I'll cut in the end of all these pieces. All 8 boards are cut with identical mortises. The glue-ups for our legs are now dry. The process will be to joint one edge of this glue-up smooth on the joiner, so we have a smooth flat edge to rip this in 2, and then plane and joint 2 legs out of each piece perfectly square, 3 inches. Back at the table saw, we've got both pieces jointed with a flat edge on one side. We're going to run against the rip fence, and I've set the rip fence approximately 3 inches. Give ourselves a little bit of room afterwards to joint and plane these edges perfectly square.